Can anybody hear me?
We can hear you, Lois. Thanks for joining. Apologies.
I keep getting knocked off.
Apologies to everyone. We have a problem where someone else is logging into our Zoom account, and when it happens, it kicks people out. So
Okay, thank you.
yeah, and I see there's someone already that's logged in as ANC3F that can't be logged in under that account besides myself. So that's the problem we're having. And we're very sorry, and we will fix this for future ANC meetings so we don't go through this again. But apologies to everyone, and hopefully we will survive and stay connected. And I see that our DC Water colleagues have joined us. So again, welcome to them, and apologies again for our technical challenges this evening.
You know, I think it might be me that might be contributing to this. This is Erica Rosenberg, but
yeah, you can't log into the Zoom account. When you sign into Zoom using ANC3F, that then bumps everyone out. So you just have to click the link rather than signing in.
I did click, I kept clicking the link and it would say I'm on another meeting and I would be
that's what's
out of
doing
all
it.
the meetings. So I don't know how to, I've logged out of Zoom like 5, 10 times now, you know?
No worries. I think we're all good.
So how do I start it? How do I do this again properly?
We're good now. We're good now.
Okay.
We'll catch up later about how to fix it going forward. No problem. Thanks, Erica. I think we have everyone here. For fear of jinxing us, I would love to get started. First, introduce myself. I'm Stan Wall. I am Commissioner for ANC3F, Single Member District 3F04. Also joined by my fellow commissioners, our chairperson, David Castile, in 3F01, Commissioner Deepa Mehta from 3F03, did I get that right? And I believe Commissioner Davis was with us as well, or Commissioner David, Claudette David is with us. And that is it as I scan through the list of our commissioners. We're also joined by Emmanuel Briggs. Emmanuel, if you could unmute and turn on your video and introduce yourself and your fellow colleagues from DC Water.
Hello all, my name is Emmanuel Briggs. I want to thank Chairperson Castile, Commissioner Wall, and other fellow ANC3F commissioners for inviting us out to your meeting to give you an update in terms of where we are with our Soapstone Valley Park sewer rehabilitation project. We understand that there have been some recent questions and concerns over recent weeks about the project as we're now in construction phase, in addition to a recent article in the Forest Hills Connection regarding our construction methods. So we're here to give you a brief spiel on where we are with the project and also jump into questions that we've received in advance. And then we'll leave some time at the end for new questions as they come in and address those as they come. I've got a number of folks on the line with me this evening as far as DC Water. The main ones that we have on the line are Barack Kainak and William Elledge. They're with the design group, pretty much the design group for this project. So they were the shepherds through their portion of it. Now that we're in construction, we have Peter Tanubu, who is our construction project manager. And we also have Annie Winter with Hazen and Sawyer. That's the firm that was also intricately involved throughout our project. And then we have Kevin Schnabel with our inland pipe rehabilitation. That is our contractor, one of our guests of honor who will be actually addressing a bulk of the questions that will be coming up in terms of the project. I want to share my screen for a moment to share 2 documents, our agenda, and then our project information sheet that we will be going through. Let's see if I can share my screen here. All right.
Emmanuel, I just made you a co-host, which should be able to give you the ability to share. So you should be able to share now.
Am I sharing now?
Yep, it's up. Thank you.
Okay. So this is pretty much the agenda for our meeting here. A brief introduction, which I've just done. I'm going to go through our project information sheet quickly, and then I'll kind of be jumping back and forth with Peter to provide some additional background information on the project in terms of where we are, and also Barak Kainak and Annie, who'll be giving us information on issues discovered during the design phase. And then we will go into the bulk of questions and answers, and then other action items, and then adjournment. So with that said, I want to jump right into the project information sheet. Can you guys see this?
It's still showing you the agenda. I think you need to unshare that and share your new window.
Okay. So let me go
while you're doing that, I want to let the folks in the audience know we did forward all the questions that we received to DC Water in advance, so that it would be able to prepare responses. I have that list, and I'll be going through it to make sure that we are covering everything. So if anything's not asked, I will raise questions from the list.
Definitely. Yeah, we'll cover everything we can think of, but if anything else comes up, please bring it to our attention.
And we'll have an open Q&A session at the end for anything that's not addressed. And Emmanuel, as a heads up, one major area of concern is the method that's going to be used to actually install the liner. So definitely want to walk through that and kind of the implications of different methods for the sewer line.
We'll jump into that first, actually. Yep. So can you all see the project information sheet?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So as many of you, hopefully all of you have seen, if not, we can provide this to you. This information for all of our capital improvement projects, our CIP projects, they're all posted on our website. So not only you get this document here, this hard copy or soft copy here, project info sheet, we also put it on the website. So as part of the overview, we're performing sewer rehab projects throughout the city. So we do this commonly as part of our capital improvement program, our CIP. The Soapstone Valley Park Sewer Rehab Project, it will address aging and defective sewer pipes extending from Albemarle Street to Broad Branch Road. And there is a map on the back of this project sheet. Some of the overarching benefits of the project will include the rectification of an aging sewer system, improved structural integrity of the pipes while maintaining adequate hydraulic capacity, reduction of stream and groundwater infiltration, and mitigation for potential sanitary sewer overflows. So in that scope of work, we're doing 4 major things. We're rehabbing approximately 6,200 linear feet of defective sanitary sewer pipe. Lots of pipe we're rehabbing. And we're also rehabbing 37 defective sewer manholes along the sewer alignment. We're going to do protection of other sewer infrastructure assets as needed. And finally, repair 1 municipal separate storm sewer system, say that fast 5 times, or MS4 outfall. The overall schedule, I know many folks are wondering about that. We're planning to start construction roughly during winter 2021, 2022. We'll get into that in more detail as the presentation goes on. I think we're looking at probably January or February timeframe, but again, we'll get into that. And then estimated construction completion, winter 2023, 2024. Under important information, we wanted to highlight many of the details that customers may be most interested in or concerned about. So we thought about everything from bypass piping that may need to be installed from manhole to manhole during certain portions of the work. For any necessary temporary interruption of sewer services during construction, you will be alerted 7 days in advance if we need to do that. I think there's one instance on this project that we may need to do that, and we can get into that a little bit more in the presentation as well. There will be some odor that will be noticed temporarily during construction operations. So intermittently, you may notice some odor. Of course, we're working with sewer, so with that comes a little bit of odor. As with all construction projects, there will be noise from equipment and workers on site that can be expected. However, during the sewer cleaning, lining, and inspection operations, you may experience excessive noise, again, for abbreviated periods. So we're not expecting for this to be in elongated intervals of just excessive noise, but abbreviated periods. We are working with a number of partners and stakeholders we've been doing that actually during the planning and design phase, and that will continue through the construction phase. Lots of partners here. And we will work to maintain a safe work zone throughout the project area to pedestrians and others, and all areas will be restored to the original condition. We are required to restore any portion of infrastructure disturbed by our construction projects in kind. So in many cases, it'll look better than it did before construction started. We've got information here in terms of our traffic. flagging operations will be used daily for each construction phase to maintain traffic in the construction zone, construction work zone. At various points during construction, no parking signage will need to be placed in certain areas. So in order to make sure we can get the work done as timely as possible, we always ask the customers, please adhere to those no parking signs that are posted. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a map on back to show the extremities of the project and where we'll be working. Again, we just kind of restate the partners here at the end. And here's some critical contact information for you if you have any questions throughout the project. Again, there's Peter Tanubu, he's our construction project manager. There's Kevin Schnabel with IPR East, Inland Pipe Rehabilitation. That's a 24/7 number if you have any questions after hours. Peter's number is a daytime number, but also his email is effective. If you have any other issues that happen in and around the job site, sometimes other things will happen while we're doing a capital improvement project. You may notice a water main break. You may notice a clogged catch basin. So any other issues outside of the actual project, water or sewer related, you can call our 24-hour emergency command center to report those. And then the office that I work in, the Office of Marketing and Communications, that's our main number. I will put my direct contact number in the chat as we're talking. But for those of you who may want to jot it down now, that's it's still 202-787. It would just be 2003 would be my direct dial to me. Once again, it's 2003, and we're all contacts if you have any questions throughout the process. With that said, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to hand things over to Peter, who will now go give us a little bit of background information on the project in terms of where we are now.
Yeah. Thank you, Emmanuel. Good evening, everybody. My name is Peter Tanubu. I'm the project manager for DC Water at Department of Engineering Technical Services, Water and Sewer Construction Branch. I will update you on the current status of the project. 1, I will summarize the progress to date. 2, the accomplishment to date. And 3, the physical construction schedule, when the construction is going to start. 1, project status. The NTP was issued on September 30, 2021. The contract duration is 733 days from NTP, from September 30, 2021. The contract completion date is October 2nd, 2023. Currently, we are in submitter phase, which means the submitter that the contractor need to submit to DC Water based on the contract's documentation. Right now, the current phase where the contractor is submitting some critical submitters. Number 1, before it can start, the safety plan, the baseline schedule, the quality control plan, and some contractor approval funds. Then the permits. Before we can start this work, majority of the work is in the NPS property. DC Water would need a special user permit to be issued by NPS. So we're going through that process right now. We need the safety plan approved so that we can, NPS is already doing the draft permit for us. So hopefully we'll be able to submit the SUP application by next week. Two, accomplishment today. We've conducted the construction pre-construction meeting that was held on October 11, 2021. The contractor submitted a safety permit. Safety is a safety plan. We're currently reviewing it. With our outreach group, have developed a draft communication plan. We've conducted community outreach event at Farmers Market at Sheridan School. We conducted outreach event at Park, Connecticut, and we are doing one tonight. This is an ongoing effort. We will be reaching out to the other community in the ANC3F. We are coordinating with other agencies, as I mentioned earlier, NPS, DOEE, DDOT, ANC, Council's office. Number 3, physical construction schedule. We anticipate the contractor to submit the baseline schedule this week, before the end of this week, for our review and approval. This is critical. This permit is what DC Water will manage this project with. The schedule will show how the contractor will manage the project from start to finish. DC Water will manage the approved baseline schedule. The schedule will show the sequence and logic of construction activities. The contractor will update the schedule monthly to highlight any changes. Once the schedule is approved, we will be able to share with the community. That's Emmanuel.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Barack and Annie, can you guys chime in now with some issues we've identified during the design phase?
Real quick, I know I'm going to interrupt them real quick.
Okay.
As we're talking, there was a comment here just a second ago. If I know that we get used to a lot of the acronyms on our site, but if we can try and remember to say the full names, NPS versus National Park Service, those kinds of things, Barack and Annie and everybody else. Not everybody's necessarily in that acronym mode with us.
Got it.
Sure. Thank you, Will. And good evening, everyone. My name is Brock Kainak, and I'm the project manager in DC Water. I was the design project manager during the design phase of this project. And I just want to talk about a few things tonight with you. We have received several customer inquiries, and we just want to elevate any concerns you may have about the health and safety of this project. Styrene occurs naturally in many foods such as cinnamon, coffee, and strawberries. Styrene derived from petroleum and natural gas byproducts. In reality, styrene is a common chemical compound found where we live and work. Indoor sources of styrene emissions include off-gassing of building materials and consumer products. Furthermore, styrene is emitted from carpet, floor waxes, and polishes and paints, adhesives, and other products. Of course, this is not to minimize the safety concerns you may have for this project, and I will talk about that more just in a minute. For over 50 years, we have been doing this CIPP work safely within the community in DC. We have safety protocols, and we follow all safety protocols. This isn't our first rodeo per se. We do CIPP rehab for miles every year. We just did a neighborhood in George Washington, nearby GWU, a little while back. And as far as streambed projects, we did Klingle Valley. So this technology has been around for quite a while, and we have been using it. We recently used it in LAT's project in Capitol Hill, and Peter Tinubu will talk more about it in a few moments. So as I said, we want to provide the best product available that we do feel safe for the public and the environment. We understand there is a Purdue article. We have seen it and we read it. And there is another article from NASCO showing that it is safe using the method that we have chosen. UV method can be applied with small equipment, but small equipment cannot push the CIPP liner as far. My understanding is that all methods will have certain restrictions depending on what pipe conditions are there. We all know this is an off-road project located in the valley in a park, so we don't want any problems in the future less opportunity to have an issue. Other methods would require additional trails, additional access paths. It would have cut more trees as well. This is a better product and process for the situation we are facing, regardless of the UV being an option. We recently don't want to have to, we certainly don't want to have to come back to the park to do any rehabilitation work in the near future, and we don't want any other issues to come up. What we believe is that styrene can be managed. There is safety protocols and guidelines the contractor will follow. Whether it is UV, steam, or water, we will follow the safety protocols that are necessary for the worst case scenarios of all those, regardless of the method. Just to talk more a little bit about the styrene and the studies, back in 2020, Louisiana Tech did a study on environmental impact on steam cured CIPP. They tested 3 sites, only 2 locations where styrene levels are an issue, were inside the transport truck. Emissions near the stack were mostly lower than the transport truck. All measurements that were beyond 10 feet or more from the termination manhole or the exhaust stack were far below guideline levels. Also near the insertion manhole, the concentration may be high, but it is below OSHA and NIOSH exposure guideline limits. And OSHA and NIOSH, they set limits for what is safe within working limits. We believe those limits are standard for CIPP industry. DC Water is working with those limits for its own workers and surrounding area. Furthermore, the measurements taken in homes near the exhaust points yielded styrene concentrations much less. That suggests there is little potential danger of styrene emissions collecting in homes and rising to levels above exposure limits. We know this issue about the styrene, and we share your concern. And there have been multiple studies. Because of that, we did modify our standard specification. Because of this studies, our specification is actually more conservative. For example, NASCO study recommends that emission stacks should be a minimum of 6 feet in height above the work area. Our specification recommends 8 feet. And we also have 15-foot perimeter around the area. It is physical perimeter. So if you go inside the perimeter, you have to have a personal protective equipment on. So the DC Water contractual documents exceed the standard recommendations to protect the workers and the public in and around CIPP cured job sites.
Mr. Koenig, if I can interrupt really quickly, I guess a few questions. One, it's very technical, so any detailed information you could send us just to allow folks in the audience to be able to digest this, because it's a lot to absorb while sitting on this call. But one key thing it'd be great for you all to address is, given the potential for that method to create these emissions, how, speaking in layman's terms, how will you, looking at the current conditions, how you understand and monitor, the emissions, again, in layman's terms, how will you monitor that, and how will you address any, emissions above, requirements?
Sure.
Well, hold on, Brock. Will, could you step in and talk about your conversation with the Tennessee University today and their efforts and what we've asked them to do? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. William Elledge, I'm the senior manager of the design branch here at DC Water. I'm responsible for the design phase of all the linear projects, the water sewer projects that we have at DC Water. I know some of you, we've been talking about this project for the better part of a decade now, or maybe even a little bit more than a decade by now. And to Mark's point, well, actually, before I get to Mark's point, the overall scheme of things is there are a set of national standards for what we do. DC Water has set a standard that's a step up above that. They require that stacks of a certain height, we have stacks of a greater height. We want to keep people farther away from these emissions. And in particular, today we were discussing, it was actually with Louisiana Tech. They do a lot of research on styrene.
No, at Tennessee, sorry.
Either way, right? We've actually had preliminary conversations with them about doing an air monitoring study in this project to make sure.
And Will, could you paste that, a report that they had in the chat for here that we researched today, so everyone on this can have that research paper, because that's not an opinion, it's not it's an actual research paper, and go in depth that we've engaged them and are more than willing to have them come monitor the project.
Yeah, and for the ANC, Mr. Wall, is it best to put that in the chat, or should we email it to you, or what's your preferred mode of receiving?
You put it in the chat. I'll pull the link and make sure we make it available to everyone.
Okay. And what that study is basically NASCO. It's the National Association for Sewer Service Companies, right? A lot of good companies like us, like DC Water, but across the whole company. Our member organizations, and we contribute funds so that they can do research on a national scale for us. And they hired Louisiana Tech a while back to do studies on how far does that styrene permeate away from a job site, right? If you open up the truck and there's styrene right there, how far does that permeate? When there's an emission plume coming from a manhole, how far does that permeate? And that study was completed a couple years ago, and informs in large part our best practices that we use, including
Could I ask
doing this project.
could I ask a question?
Please.
I have three questions for DC Water. Have you ever met with a professor from Purdue to find out exactly what concerns him and what he has in mind? If you haven't met with him, when are you going to do it, or do you decline to do it? And I heard the previous speaker who talked about, I think he said dozens of CIPP projects have been done all over the district. Have you published a list of all the steam type, supposedly innocuous styrene things that have been done all over the district, so that people who live in other parts of the district and are perhaps not as vigorously represented as these Ward 3 people, one of whom I am, who are concerned about Soapstone, can see what's been happening in their neighborhoods and is liable to happen in their neighborhoods. Is this an open and transparent process, or is this just we're doing a little bit more than somebody requires, and so we're satisfied with it?
So to that last bit, we're definitely willing to be as open and transparent as we can be. You're asking for information that we're happy to share. You had asked about the.
I'm not asking, I'm asking, have you ever met, or has anybody from DC Water ever met with a professor from Purdue? And if you haven't, when are you going to do it?
No, I have. I've discussed, I've met him. My interaction with him is because of mutual partnership, participation in national committees. I've really interacted with him at conferences, right? I know who he is. I introduced myself. We talk about this, that, and the other. When he publishes papers, I make sure to read them. They tend to be fairly newsworthy and get attention. This is everything related to CIP, in particular styrene. We ingest all of this news as it's coming through, and as new researchers coming forward, whether it's health impacts or air studies, or what are the various chemicals, or for that matter, what are the technological improvements within that maybe captures it better, or all the different kinds of things. We're very familiar with his research. He's been doing it.
Will, that's not my question. I'm not asking whether you've read his published papers. I'm glad you have. I've asked whether anybody at DC Water, anybody who has responsibility for safety and other related issues, has met with the professor from Purdue to discuss your program of CIPP, what you have done over the past few years in neighborhoods all over the District of Columbia, who may or may not know what's happening to them, and what he would recommend. You don't have to take his advice, but it seems to me very odd that you haven't apparently met with him as DC Water, which is a leading cutting edge utility in the country, and say, well, we're looking at the association of other sewer authorities for guidance, instead of trying to see if we could get anything that's useful to us to protect our employees, to protect the neighborhoods we serve, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you wouldn't necessarily take his advice, but at least find out what he did. Because, I mean, the article that Marjorie Scher published in the Forest Hills Connection early today, I think it was, has a number of examples of other parts of the country and other agencies who seem to be taking a lot more interest than DC Water does. I can tell you, if I were on your board of directors today, as I was for 10 years, I would expect an explanation by management, by Mr. Gaddis, with all the different silos you have, the way DC Water has been reorganized over the years. Are you really seriously looking at any of and all of the concerns that the professor from Purdue is raising as applies to District of Columbia? And maybe while we're talking about it,
Mr. Barden,
applies to the intersection of Virginia.
I think that Mr. Elledge has begun to address the question. I think there's more information that DC Water can provide us, the broader community, to dig into and understand exactly how they'll be mitigating those risks. I do, if you don't mind, I would like to pause on the styrene, because there are a lot of other concerns that I would like them to address, and that the community has raised with regard to their construction staging and methodologies. So if we can put a pause on that question, I don't necessarily consider it resolved, but would like to allow DC Water to run through the rest of the questions, and we can come back to talking more about the styrene emissions, if that's okay with you.
Stan, can I say something? It's Marjorie, please.
Go ahead, Marjorie.
To wrap up the styrene issue, the fact that DC Water is discussing styrene only is to me a warning, because it's one of the VOCs, as you know, of the 29 that gets released. So the fact that you're only going to this study about the styrene, which is a toxin, makes me believe that you're either partially uninformed about the issue, or that you're perhaps trying to create a fog around this, or a little of both. It really, really concerns me, because it's not only the styrene that's an issue.
Excuse me,
Absolutely.
Mr. Wall.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm not sure how, I don't see the feature to raise my hand, but my name is Keisha Powell. I'm the COO for DC Water.
Hi,
So I
Keisha,
just
welcome.
wanted
Thank you.
to thank you for having us this evening. I think what the team has attempted to do, given the concerns that were specifically raised, was to prepare responses and try their best to address those specific concerns that have been raised. To Mr. Bardeen's questions, we've not specifically spoken with that professor, but we have been speaking with the district's Department of Environment and reviewing other data and information related to this methodology and process, given the recent articles and studies that have been published and are working with others to make sure that we have the full body of information that we can review. We'll speak with whoever we believe we need to speak to. We don't work in silos. Our teams are working together in coordinated fashion to make sure that we're safeguarding and protecting the public as we attempt to do what is necessary critical infrastructure work. So if we need to return to provide an update on the discussions that we are engaging in and provide more detail, we can certainly do that. But the team here this evening and as I believe Will has said, there has been a number of years of discussions about this project and the need, have tried to address those questions. So I appreciate you allowing them to continue addressing the additional questions, and we'll come back and provide more detail on this specific issue and concern. Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us, and I appreciate that. And I think there will be some more direct follow-ups in terms of understanding more about, the business case that went into deciding. Mr. Shull raised this question. The business case that went into deciding to use the C method versus UV or other methods, as well as just understanding more about the economic and cost implications of different choices, as compared to potential environmental implications. So I think we will be preparing some follow-up questions to dig into that more fully. But I do want to again allow you all to move through the rest of the questions that others have raised. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks, Commissioner Wall. So there were and going to the remainder of the questions, I'm going to go through them as we receive them. So the first one was explain the DOEE permitting process for this project. Peter, do you want to?
I think I was going to take that one, Emmanuel.
Or Annie?
Yeah. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Annie Winter. I am with Hazen & Sawyer. We are the design and engineering firm that supported DC Water in developing the design and oversaw the preparation of the environmental assessment that many of you are familiar with, as well as the acquisition of some of the environmental permits that we oversaw during development of the design. In terms of the DOEE process, my understanding is that DOEE would prefer that individuals interested in the process reach out directly to DOEE to discuss the process. I will say that DOEE has had a permitting role to play in this project on a number of different fronts, including floodplain management, floodplain permitting, water quality permitting under the Clean Water Act, as well as air quality permitting. The first two of these, the floodplain permitting and the water quality permitting, those are permits and permitting coordination. Oh, I'm sorry, there's an echo. It may be maybe my headphone. Let me just take this out and I will try again. I apologize. Is this better to hear? Okay, sorry for that. I'm happy to repeat anything that was unclear. Essentially, the permitting aspects that we've engaged with DOE so far under the design has been with respect to water quality permitting and with floodplain permitting. There will be air quality permitting that we are coordinating with them at the moment, and that those permits will be coordinated and obtained during construction. One other note I just wanted to bring up while we're talking about permitting, and this was not a question that was asked, but I think it would be helpful for the community just to be reminded. One of the commitments that was made in consultation with the National Park Service when we were developing the environmental assessment was to ensure the safety of the park users during construction period. The park is going to be closed for the duration of construction, at least the portion on National Park Service property. So there is a bit of a distinction between what is technically NPS property and what is owned by the District Department of Transportation. As codified in the EA, we are anticipating that at least the NPS portion of the park will be closed for the duration of construction. At the time, it was envisioned that that would be 2 years. Also, following construction, as determined in consultation with NPS, there will be some fencing that's been added to the park along the trails, the official trails. Some of the unofficial trails will be closed off. The purpose of the fencing and the closure of some of the unofficial trails is to protect some of the plantings that we are going to be putting back into the park as part of our design, as part of our post-construction restoration. And so we need to be able to protect those and ensure that that those are able to take to sort of grow. So I did want to make sure that that was something that the community was aware of. I'll hand it back over to you, Emmanuel.
All right, thanks, Annie. Right. The next question was, what forms of water and air pollution control from the cured in place piping or CIP process, hot water steam will be used?
Yes, hi, that'd be Kevin on the IPR. So for this project itself, we will be using a steam curing for the process. With that, all of our processes will follow along with the guidelines, drawings, and specifications that are approved. As noted, this project has been multi-year, multi-agencies. We're going to follow along with the device that is approved from all those to adhere to anything for the safety of this project.
All right, the next question was, where will the equipment be staged, when, and for how long?
So this project itself is over 730 days long. So with that, there'll be multi-stages. We'll have projects going at the very top throughout the stages. With that, we'll have to have equipment at each of these different stages. Once it's not necessary, we'll remove it and allow the access back as required for the public.
All right.
I can push that a little bit further. There's definitely some concerns around the apartment buildings on Connecticut, Park Van Ness and Park Connecticut. Looking at the map you showed earlier, you actually show an access point right between those two buildings. Can you talk more about exactly when that access point will be used, what equipment will be there, and what it will be like in terms of noise, dust, fumes, or any other impacts to those residents in those two buildings?
Yep. So one of the biggest things we'll be adhering to is DDOT. With that, we'll have to give a traffic control plan per the requirement. They'll be approving it and we'll adhere to it. One of the biggest things that we do want to always have is access to the garage in any of those buildings themselves. That part of the project is a smaller portion as we're working to get the baseline schedule submitted and then approved. I can't guarantee what time it is now. It will be a minimal process. It will be roughly 2 trucks that could be in there at any given time, but access to all garages will be open the full time of our work.
And have you, and sorry to stick on this topic, have you engaged with the two buildings property managers, and is there a plan to provide access for those residents in terms of emergency numbers or complaint numbers? If there is, disruptive, activity happening there, how do they actually raise that and get it addressed as quickly as possible?
Yes, as noted, I'm the 24-hour contact on the project information sheet, so they can reach out to me. With that, all work would be happening between 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., which is a standard for DDOT. With that as well, normal construction sounds and activities as you see throughout the city, nothing that should be any more. Our work in that area is limited, so it is not a great deal of duration compared to the overall schedule for this whole contract.
And I know that you all have requested that detailed schedule from your contractor. We really need to see that. And ideally that schedule should show exactly where work will be happening and where things will be being staged, so that residents have an idea of kind of, yes, it's going to be bad or noisy for a certain period, but they know that it's a few weeks or whatever the time period is to help better manage expectations and impacts. So we'd love to see that schedule as soon as it's available, the detailed schedule that does include phasing and kind of where you're going to be throughout the corridor.
I can jump in there too, Commissioner Wall. So as part of what we do, what we've been doing for the last, I would say, few years for our capital improvement projects is to provide a weekly schedule. So I will be sending you an email. So basically, every week there'll be a new bi-weekly schedule to come out and to kind of show you the construction activities for the upcoming 2 weeks. So every week you can expect to get an email from me with what the next week's activities, the next 2 weeks activities will be. I'll jump on that part and saying, which is a good reason why we're doing all of this outreach that we're doing, because every time we go out, whether it's virtual or in person, is that we request as many email addresses from residents directly as possible. We're always building our contact list, and that contact list will get just that, a weekly forecast of the next week's schedules and the week after. And we typically send that to the council member's office, the ANCs, the MOKers, and for every resident that we have email addresses for.
Thank you.
All right. The next question we had on the list is, where will the access roads be located? And what is the final count and location of tree loss?
So similar to before, we will be hearing to the drawings of the plans. With that, we have it already mapped out per those drawings. For the tree loss, currently, until we get all permits and then able to go in and do a tree survey, we cannot give the exact quantity for that. It is unknown at the very moment.
All right. What materials will be used in construction, and what risk do any pose to residents, wildlife, and habitat? What is being done to mitigate any risk?
Emmanuel, I know we're going to answer that question in just a second. I just wanted to add on to what I said earlier about the tree count. We have that in the environmental assessment. There is that number that we're definitely going to stay below. The reason Kevin says that we're not 100% certain what the final tree count will be is because he's proposed various options to try and reduce that count. But based on the limitations of working through there and what we can do from a permit perspective and what we can't do, as well as the ongoing updated tree survey, that number will likely vary a little bit. So we're still looking on that. But the number that you all remember from the environmental assessment, that is an absolute cap that we would not be going over under any circumstance.
Can I ask a quick question that kind of relates to several things that have been discussed? On the south side of Soapstone, of course, you have Van Ness North and Van Ness South, or excuse me, Van Ness North and Van Ness East. We're the co-op on the Van Ness North and then the condo next door. And you were talking about some interruption with regard to the system. And also, I think Annie Winters talked about the social trails, of course, that are through there. So I was wondering, you're going to have people roaming all over the place on the south side if you don't do some, cutoff or letting people know they're not supposed to go down into the park from there. You've got several. And then with regard to interruption, and I take it you're going to address that a little bit later, but I did want to state something about coordination with the Van Ness North and Van Ness East, which will also be impacted by this project. Thank you.
So was the concern as it relates to the coordination with Van Ness North and East, was it about people using the social trails and getting down into at that point in time what would be a construction site, or was it more general coordination with the building to keep y'all up to date?
It's both. I spoke too quickly because I know everybody's pressed to keep this going, but there is a if I understand this right, looking at all the drawings, there is a manhole on our side that you're going to be using to go into, and probably using the parking lot to Van Ness East. Now we're a cooperative Van Ness North, but our sewer system, both of ours go to that same manhole, and we could be affected, and nobody has approached our management, and I discussed it together with both managements of both buildings. As far as the social trails concerned, they come off from our property and they come off of Van Ness East property. And there's several that go into the park.
So I'm going to ask Annie if you can answer, if you can discuss the requirements that the park gave us as to fencing and the social trails and what we're doing with those afterward. And then Barack, if you can share a little bit about the coordination that we did. It has been a little bit of time with various building management teams, and then we'll take it from there a little bit. Annie, can you chime in on the fencing requirement and the trail requirement? Oh, we just lost Annie.
Sure.
Oh, there she is.
So the fencing is shown on some of the final plans. There are certain locations where NPS identified for us that they were certain that they did want fencing. Some of that is off the access that comes off the west side of the park. And then there were a couple of areas where they anticipated that they may want fencing. And so there is an allowance in the contract for NPS and the contractor at DC Water in the field to make determinations where additional fencing may be warranted.
Could you speak up? Could you speak up?
Yes. So I indicated that on the plans, on the final design plans, we did add fencing. Fencing is shown in locations where NPS was clear. This is where fencing was going to be requested. Some fencing is going to be installed along the entrance that comes off the west side of the park. I want to also clarify that this is, there are two kinds of fencing. There's fencing that's going to be placed around some of the trees that's for protection. And then this is actually fencing that's going to be more of a safety and a barrier to ensure that folks are staying out of areas that need a little bit of time in order to regrow. So there will be some negotiation and discussion with NPS, with National Park Service during construction to identify additional areas where fencing may be warranted or may be requested by National Park Service. They are the landowner, and so we do have to be accommodating of their requests and their vision for usage of the park overall, as well as, you know, their desires for future operation and maintenance concerns moving forward. I'm not sure if there was also a question on the social trails and the obliteration of the social trails. That is another item that we've identified in the contract, but it is again going to be a little bit at the discretion of National Park Service in consultation with DC Water and the contractor as to which exact social trails need to be blocked off, again, in order to ensure the long-term growth and sustainability of the natural components of the park in keeping with NPS's long-term vision.
Thank you, Annie. And then Barack, if you can chime in on that coordination that we had done a little while back on the with
Sure.
various buildings.
Yes, absolutely. Well, so we have coordinated with the residents and the apartment and condos in the vicinity. For example, we have coordinated with Park Venice Apartments and Park Connecticut Apartments because of the CIPP lining work in the alley between those apartments. And we have also coordinated with Venice East condominiums because of the staging area that will be set for the manhole lining work. So those are the large buildings that we have coordinated with because they will get impacted due to this project. But Venice North condo building we will not impact their private property for staging or any CIPP work. So
well, can I ask a question though? Both Venice East and Venice North, which is a co-op where I live, both pipes from our building, sewage pipes, go into the manhole that's going to be lined. Will this project affect us?
The sewage that's flowing into that manhole will be bypassed around that section while it's being lined. So for your section in North, or for that matter, both of the buildings, in the building itself, you won't notice a difference because it'll all be bypassed from that manhole around the work site.
But nobody's been in touch with our manager about that specifically. So if there is any coordination with Venice East, with respect to that, or if there's any interruption, our manager here at Van Ness North needs to be contacted.
So we will absolutely 100% do that. To be honest, I thought we had, just to clarify, this is when you drive around to the right side of the building and you're in back and the parking lot's back there, that's that manhole in the back right before the park drops off. That we're talking about that same manhole, right?
I know exactly where it's at because we had to locate it for our CIPP project.
Okay. Yeah, we will absolutely reach out. To be honest, I thought we had done that, but we will make sure and do so first thing tomorrow.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, as part of our communications plan, we do plan to reach out to all of the various community stakeholders, i.e. the multifamily units in the area. We've been doing some really for years now, as Will has mentioned, but in this round with the construction, we'll also be doing that for the construction phase as well. So we have not come to you yet. We will be doing that in the coming weeks. That I guarantee. We are putting finishing touches on our communications plan, and that will include that direct outreach to you.
And Emmanuel, how do people get onto the mailing list? There was a question earlier in the chat about how do they get that?
So just provide me, you can email me, and I'll put my contact in the chat box. You can email me and just say add me to the Soapstone list. And so I'm including folks all the time. I'll put my number so you can call and leave me a voicemail, or call and talk to me, or send me an email and just say add me to the list.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. I see one hand up.
Excuse me. I'm sorry, Commissioner Wall. May I insert something here?
Absolutely, yeah.
Sure. Okay. Thank you all from DC Water for joining us tonight. I'm going to take just a 30,000-foot view of this because as I step back and listen to some of the comments that the folks from DC Water are addressing, and I look at the comments that are being posted in the chat, everything's falling into one of two categories in my simple mind here. One is that people are concerned about the technology that it has been selected, the CIPP process, and want to revisit that and understand whether all the sort of variables were considered regarding harm to the environment, harm to people, harm to the air and the release of VOCs and all that stuff. And other folks are sort of proceeding forward with the process of this. How is this going to happen? What's the communication? What's the timeline? How will it impact us? So the question that I have sitting here as a commissioner that represents a lot of people in SM3F03 and my colleagues who are also here representing other folks is, how far down the path are you, and I'd like you to be very blunt and clear about this, please. How far down the path are you in terms of this being a done deal with this technology and with this contractor? Because if we're at a point right now where there is, you're telling us there's no turning back and this is happening exactly the way you're prescribing it, that the CIPP process is going to be used, then I think, I think people in this meeting need to understand that, and we need to figure out sort of how to proceed from there and mitigate the impacts that folks are concerned about.
So you requested is 100% legitimate. Let me the short and short of it is we have an environmental assessment that is basically part of an approved permit from Park Service to do this job, and that allows for cured in place pipe installation. It doesn't allow for any other methods. As many of you will remember, we went through all of the scenarios, right? We came up with many different alternatives. And this was the only one that even made it into the environmental assessment. All the others were dismissed for various other reasons, as described in the environmental itself, why they were dismissed. So CIPP is what we have a permit for. We do have a contract in place with Kevin is representing the contractor, IPR. We're fully intending to proceed with that. We are a few months from any actual work on the ground, so there is still time to work through concerns. I do want to make clear, I mean, we're DC Water, right? We're in every single road in the district. we feel like we're your neighbors. So we don't want to just barge through and push a project, you know, despite concerns, right? We do have time to work through concerns and make sure, you know, that we discuss these things. We won't be able to resolve all the concerns. You know, we just never will be able to. But we're happy to you know, spend time and make sure we can resolve as many as possible.
Quick follow-up,
So-
Commissioner Mehta.
yeah.
And just to clarify, cured in place, there's multiple methods of cured in place. So to kind of double down on Commissioner Mehta's question, is the steam hot water version of cured in place a decided, you know, aspect? Or is there still an opportunity to pursue the UV method, which has fewer potential emissions?
So I mean, there's kind of a lot to that question, right? The styrene is in the resin. The method by which you cure it doesn't affect the volume of the styrene. There are even concerns with the emissions of styrene using UV, because that resin, instead of, or that styrene and Marjorie, to your earlier, and all the other chemicals that are part of that resin, right? When you're using a steam cure, that gets caught up in the water, the steam particulates, right? And the air emissions. In a water cure, it gets flushed down the sewer system, by and large. In a UV system, when you cut those laterals open that go up to your homes, that gas actually permeates out at that point of where the lateral is reinstated, and it actually goes up your laterals to your homes, right? So that styrene is just there. The question is, how do we manage it? What are the safety protocols we put in place? We've done a lot of research. We've got good tried and true best practices on this. We feel like after a thorough discussion, we should be able to resolve those concerns. I'm hopeful anyway. And we're committed to providing whatever information we can to get to that point.
So I'm sorry, just to clarify, I appreciate that explanation, but I'm unclear on why the permit is for this particular method. Was a permit applied for the UV method, or this was the only permit was sought, and that's why this was the permit that was given, and that's why therefore you are proceeding on that permit?
So there's a small technicality here that I'm going to introduce. The permit is a special use permit from Park Service. That is actually technically still in process. That permit, though, when it's actually issued, what it does is it authorizes the project to proceed as described in the environmental assessment. The environmental assessment is the document that's complete. So when the part of your question about, is it this method, the environmental assessment talks about cured in place pipe. It doesn't specify a methodology. It doesn't specify the specific resin makeup. It just says,
I see.
It's a typical CIPP resin. And the reason that's the case in an environmental assessment is those different resins, from a limit of disturbance in a footprint, you know, we wanted to keep that footprint as small as possible, but also still have it large enough that we could make long pushes so that we weren't having to build an access path along the entire pipe and get to every single manhole. So there's a lot of trade-offs there, and safety being the biggest one, tree count being a significant one. We also have the habitat for the long-eared bat, and then there's the wetlands, there's the stream itself. There's a lot of factors that feed into this, and basically through that process, I mean, we came up with probably 24 alternatives, right? And just our brainstorming session of what could we possibly do. There's rerouting, there's tunnel, I mean, all kinds of different things. And we very quickly got down to a handful, and then very quickly thereafter it got to just a couple. And through coordination with Park Service, and it's their decision, they said the EA should only have the two alternatives. One of them is the CIPP, and the other one is a no action alternative. The no action we don't really see as a viable option, because that just leads to more sewer overflows. I mean, for those of you who've lived in the area for more than just a few years, you know, we've had a few overflows in this park. So we don't really see the no action as a viable alternative.
Mr. Elledge, there's a hand that's been raised. I'm sorry, Commissioner Mehta, did you have any follow-up question?
please let others speak. Go ahead. Thank you. though.
Ms. Bokhari had your hand raised. Go ahead.
So I actually had a follow-up question on this thread, and I looked at the environmental impact or what, I found on the website or was passed on the website. And I didn't see anything about the CIPP process in terms of getting toxins into the air, which seems to be a well understood impact of the project per, the Florida Health document that was, that was signed off by the governor of Florida. And it was also several other impact reports that have shown that there is, release of toxins from this process, but I saw nothing in the environmental assessment about that. So I was just wondering, is that in a document somewhere? Has that been really addressed at all? Because that should be factored into the overall assessment of whether CIPP is the right way to go versus the redirect, which I know was originally part of consideration. Thanks.
I would like to add and piggyback on what Rihanna just said in terms of the EA not addressing some of these things, but also Executive Order 11988 on floodplain management. And it's my understanding that the Park Service did delegate that to DC Water and I know you're going through the permit process with DOEE, but since the executive order was delegated to you, just like what Rihanna said, that executive order, I know exactly what it does because I was the consultation person, key and only consultation person at FEMA to provide agencies like Park Service and others how the executive order works. And after reviewing what you addressed what was addressed in that executive order response, your review, it was pretty perfunctory. It's supposed to address all impacts, including the CIPP, any actions impacting that floodplain or impacting any fish or other wildlife and so forth. And they were addressed. There was just like the manhole thing, which I raised, protection of those. None of that was addressed in the executive order. And to do a proper executive order review in the future, if you're delegated that responsibility, you need to address all the issues that are in a floodplain that are outlined in the guidelines for floodplain management, the executive order. So I just want raising that because if the EA is not addressing it, the executive order, if it's in the floodplain, which this whole thing is in the floodplain, must address all those issues.
So the floodplain permitting is as you all know is run through FEMA and in particular in our case in DOEE. If I know we're going to lose Annie at some point in time, are you still on the line and can you speak to the floodplain permitting process that we went through, both with the Corps and the?
It's not a permitting process. It's how you did the executive order 11988 review, which was pretty much perfunctory language, which should have addressed all the issues we're raising this evening and any other actions in the floodplain. And they should have been addressed there in terms of the fact that you have to take this action in the floodplain. So what are the impacts and how are you addressing them? And that wasn't done. Not that I could see.
I'll let Annie share what we did do as it pertains to floodplain, and then after that we can come back to that redirect question in the EA.
Yeah, thanks, Will. So we did acknowledge the executive order and we did address it in the environmental assessment. In addition to that, we did at the direction and request of National Park Service prepare a standalone statement of findings addressing impacts to both wetlands and floodplains. That is National Park Service's way of sort of implementing that executive order. And as part of that, we were required to develop a functional uplift assessment that evaluated the future with and future without conditions and evaluate whether or not the project would have an adverse impact or no impact or have a beneficial impact on various components of the floodplain and the stream. So we did use that as part of our documentation in our coordination with NPS in order to meet the NPS guidance criteria for the preparation and the ultimate publication of the environmental assessment.
And then Kevin, you're used to working in floodplains as well. Can you share some of the things you're putting into place to manage that aspect of the project?
Yes, correct. So I know, as you're familiar, like we did work at National Arboretum. We do work for WSC for their ESA projects, which stands for Environmental Sensitive Areas. What we do is obviously first we want to come assess it, do our stakeouts, ensure that we minimize any kind of impact we have as much as possible. From there, we have arborists that ensure that any trees that have to come out are tagged, bring down any ones that we can and the least impactful as possible. From there, it's doing access roads. These access roads include mulch and then timber matting to allow our equipment to then access the area without damaging any kind of root beds or streams for that. Afterwards, we'll bring in another group that will do restoration for streams that are specifically experts in that field, and then also kind of tree planting and also plants.
And then
that didn't pertain to this project, but I just want to reiterate again, did National Park Service delegate the executive order review to DC Water or DOEE? I'm talking about something very different than permitting. You have to permit these and I was also the lead senior floodplain management official at FEMA, giving guidance to 24,000 plus communities. So I know this stuff, and I can tell you that if it was delegated, you need to do a better review in the future. I don't think a sufficient review was done here, where all the explanations, all the issues we're bringing here, whatever is in the floodplain, the natural and beneficial functions, the manholes, the CIPP work, that needed all to be addressed in the executive order and then incorporated into the EA.
We'll have to get back to you on the specifics of that. I'm not familiar with DC Water having that authority, but I'm responsible for the design side of things, right? I mean, DOEE has an entire department that looks at floodplains, so that's my assumption. But we'll have to get back to you. Annie, unless you happen to know.
Yeah, so it is the case that in this instance that the National Park Service was the lead agency under NEPA for this, but they delegated the responsibility of the preparation of the EA, ensuring that it is prepared in accordance with the NPS guidance and appropriate pertinent executive orders to DC Water and DC Water's consultants. So just to be clear, it was not DOEE that had a role to play in terms of evaluating the compliance of this project or the accordance of this project with that executive order. It does sound like we are hearing concerns about, the substantial nature or lack thereof of that analysis. And so I think it is helpful to understand that this is something that folks in the community would like to see more of in future environmental assessments going forward. And certainly there's more work to be done with NPS, and we'll take that into account.
Thank you, Annie. And I'm a little bit lost on who asked this question. There was a question about the redirect. I'm not sure exactly what you meant by redirect versus CIPP. Was that basically building a new sewer going a completely different direction, perhaps? And I apologize for not remembering who asked that question. I'm not exactly sure what you meant by redirect.
I think you might be, this is Rihanna Bokhari. I think you might be referring to my question. My question was far more focused on the environmental impacts to people and also other living things in the area. It is not safe to make plastics out in the open. Generally speaking, when I looked at that list of different compounds that go into the air, needless to say, I was very, very concerned because there's not a clear way to just avoid coming into contact with those as a person that lives very close to the possible construction site. So I need to know, has anyone actually considered whether we would be safe?
Safeties are number one. I mean, we can talk about cost, we can talk about trees, we can talk about all the other criteria. Safety is absolutely on the top of the list. If we believe this was unsafe, we would not be moving forward.
So is there documentation of the assessment of safety to the public? I mean, you know, there's assessments of the safety of the procedure to, you know, the park in terms of environmental impacts and things like that, but there's nothing about, you know, the fact that this process just by itself puts, you know, toxic compounds, volatile compounds into the air. And there's no assessment of whether that impacts air quality, also the fact that the trees and the wildlife in the area will be impacted by that. Even if there's no people in the area, the wildlife will be impacted by that. It surprises me that air quality was not really touched in those assessments. And unless I just didn't see it, and then you can provide me with the correct you know, documentation that does show these impacts. I mean, that would be great to know. So.
Yeah, we're happy to provide, and Mark mentioned it earlier. We'll share those studies that we're relying on that talk about the safety protocols that go into, you know, how far away should we be from homes, what kind of things can we do to capture it, to keep it away from people and animals and other living creatures. Happy to share that information. As you're aware, I mean, the environmental assessment process took quite a while. There was a significant change in the middle of it as to the procedures in how environmental assessments are produced, in particular, their volume and what can be included and what can't be. I mean, these are the rules that we go through in order to get a project like this permitted. We obviously feel like we met those. Happy to share additional information that we're relying on as it relates to safety.
Yeah, that would be very, very helpful. It would also be helpful to know what the process would be for, you know, as we know, you know, things may not have been known about the impacts of something maybe a few years ago when the permits were issued, but perhaps we have better and more clear information now about the safety concerns, especially since, you know, it seems like in 2019, there were some new assessments done. I don't have it all in front of me, but it seems like some of the new information about the danger and the impacts on people near these construction sites have been becoming more and more common and more you know, often brought up. So perhaps there's new information. So we need to understand as residents how you plan to address this information. And I think my original question about the redirect is, you know, I saw in earlier presentations that there was an initial thought that you could redirect the sewer system outside of the park as one option rather than just, you know, trying to repair the leaking and really damaged sewer system that's in it. So, you know, I think as a resident, it would be good to understand why we are choosing this CIPP process, which is potentially toxic to residents, instead of the process that may just require some more uprooting of the park. So understanding of that, the pros and cons and the trade-off on that front as a resident would be very, very helpful.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned is redirecting the sewer out of the park. So that was actually the second alternative that lived the longest, and ultimately it was deemed it was removed from even the environmental assessment because the sewer comes into the park at various locations, right? The bulk of it comes in right at the intersection of Albemarle, just east of Connecticut. Is that 40? I forget what that street is right there, right where the trail starts to go down to Valley. Oh, I'm blanking on the street name. Valley Terrace. Anyway,
Audubon Terrace.
Audubon.
Audubon Terrace. Thank you. the realignment option would have required that each of those sewers, and there's about 7 of them, would have been picked up and rerouted in various places, including the one that comes down between the alley, because that's down very deep. And all of those small sewers would have required small pump stations. If some of you who've been involved with the project or been participating in our meetings for more than 4 or 5 years, will remember some of those conversations we had about multiple pump stations having to be located in the park. Pump stations have, I mean, right now we have a gravity system that's not consuming diesel fuel to run or electricity, and each of those pump stations would have been the equivalent of basically having a small mid-size SUV running its engine in the park to keep those pumps moving. So that alternative was eliminated once we determined, you know, how could we route the flow and where would it end up, and ultimately you have to get the park or the sewer flow up out of the park, and getting it uphill is what necessitated those pump stations. So that redirect option was basically eliminated for that reason. The environmental aspects of that reason in particular. The overall on the safety, have there been issues with CIPP? Absolutely. There's hundreds of millions of feet of CIPP installed every year throughout the country. If it doesn't take much of a Google search to find projects that have had problems, to find restaurants that were, you know, inundated or whatever it might be. And I think one of the things that we're seeing in the industry as more and more research is happening on this is research organizations like NASCO, like Louisiana Tech, are coming up with research-based best practices for safety and how to manage that. Because of those incidents, we know what to do to keep everybody safe, and that's why we've added those to our standard specifications. Right, every time we put one of these cured in place pipe projects out, it has that requirement in it now. 3 years ago, it did not. So that's a safety improvement that we've made in the last few years. In part because of the ongoing research, whether it's Purdue, Louisiana Tech, or I mean, in all fairness, there's about 4 or 5 universities that do a lot of research on this kind of thing. And there's gobs and gobs of consultants who serve on volunteer committees, including employees at DC Water, who serve on these volunteer committees with NASCO, with ASCE and others doing research to make sure primarily that we're safe, that we can rehabilitate the infrastructure, both in DC, right? I mean, they're national committees that I'm talking about here. You know, infrastructure, the rehabilitation and improvement and replacement of this infrastructure is very important. So we have a lot of really smart people throughout the country looking at these things. And luckily, we're able to benefit from all that research that's happening.
So I think just one more quick follow-up question before there's someone with the raised hand, but okay, that is in some ways reassuring. However, and it's not that we don't trust you, but it makes me wonder whether or not it would be beneficial for residents to feel more comfortable with this type of project in our backyard. If we could have some sort of outside, unrelated, you know, no stakeholder assessment of the project to ensure that, you know, residents, even, you know, hundreds of feet from these areas will not be impacted, because I read in certain health assessments that NIOSH recommends that those workers that are close to these types of CIPP, you know, sites should be wearing respirators and chemical gloves, changing them frequently, which I know is standard practice for if you're using, you know, making plastics. So I think that, you know, if I live a couple hundred feet from that area, I should be pretty worried that I'm not outside with a respirator on myself. So then the question is, I kind of need to understand a little bit better so yeah, I mean, I would love to see the documents and see all that stuff, but it would also be, I think, reassuring for the public to have like an outside assessment to ensure that you guys are going above and beyond those standards, as you say. It's not that we don't believe you, it's just that.
Will?
Yes.
Hi, it's Marjorie.
Marjorie? Yeah.
Marjorie, Nick Scholl had his hand up. Can we
I'm
let
sorry,
him
go
ask
ahead.
his question first?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess one, I would echo the independent assessment, but professionally, I've been involved in a number of infrastructure planning projects, and all of them have communication plans and risk assessments and all this information that's available a year before construction starts. And I guess my great frustration as a resident of one of the buildings that'll be directly affected is, why is this being started now? It seems like, there was a mention of, oh, well, we worked with a farmer's market. You communicate with one building, but not mine. I'm just completely failing to understand why communication has been weighted to this late hour. And I think the fact that it has been so delayed is contributing to the high degree of skepticism, because it feels sort of like this is being rushed and we don't have time to do research properly. So our only choice really is to react with a high degree of skepticism.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I appreciate that concern, and I know that all of our communication efforts can't reach everybody. We've had more meetings about this project and more public meetings over the last decade than maybe not all of the other projects combined, but Emmanuel, I'm not speaking for all of DC Water as far as the linear, the pipeline type stuff that comes out of my shop. We've had several meetings. I'm 99% positive we've met with every single, for condo buildings, every single building management group, some representative. We will confirm that. Someone else mentioned that earlier, that I need to, Barack and I are going to confirm that and reach out tomorrow. I understand that. We've been at this a while. It took us several years to get through the National Park Service process, through that NEPA process, and get that FONSI approved. At this point in time, at some point in time, we actually have to start building the project, right? And we're still a few months away from actual boots on the ground. So there's there is still time to resolve these concerns, discuss these concerns and such.
But I don't feel like you're really doing best practice here, at least from a communication standpoint, because you're saying you're a few months away, but like 2 months away for a project that you've been going through a decade is not really a huge amount of time. I understand government studies can take a while. I've been involved in plenty of them myself, but at the same time, this is an area that DC is a growing region, has a lot of new residents, a lot of switchover. So just because you communicated with people 10 years ago does not mean you are communicating with the stakeholders today, or the stakeholders who have moved into the area. To me, that's not really a satisfactory answer. And so what I'd like to know is, what is your communications plan going to be? And it can't just be, hey, for the people who have heard about this meeting, we'll take your email addresses. You should have a big voice communication out to the community that is continuously providing these updates. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the comment.
Yeah, so Mr. Shaw, thanks for your comments. Certainly, you make a very good point. And also piggyback on Will's comment, we have been at this for years. That certainly does not take into account customers who have moved in, even in the last year or the last 6 months. But that's just what this basically is. I'll quickly just let you know that this is part of our construction outreach protocol. We are required to reach out to customers 3 to 4 months before a construction project starts. So that's the typical time frame that we will reach out for a new project. But understanding the scale of this one, we've been aggressively doing outreach throughout the planning and design phases. So as I mentioned earlier, as part of our communications plan, we will be doing pretty much, I'm going to call it a tour of the buildings, and just setting up, just like we did with Park Connecticut. We will be doing the similar presentations. And as Will mentioned, we're going to be working on those things tomorrow in terms of, we've already been working on the schedule in terms of events and things of that nature, but we will be coming to you. Again, this is just one of many ways of outreach we will be doing. I know we mentioned farmers markets, we've done that thus far, but that's just to let you know that we, in the construction phase, are in the folds in terms of outreach. And so we will be coming to the different buildings. So we do apologize if the information, if we have not reached out to you with the information before now, but we will be doing a lot of outreach. We'll be hearing from us. We will be saturating the area in terms of the different activities we'll be doing and information we'll be sharing.
And Emmanuel, one quick point that I want to give. Marjorie had a question, then Mr. Barden, David Barden is next. But we do want to ask that as soon as you receive that detailed schedule from your contractor, that you share it with us in the ANC and the community more largely, as well as sharing a very clear, detailed staging plan, again, to help people understand where you will be and when, as it relates to proximity to these buildings. And again, to reiterate, some of the concerns, a lot of it just seems to be that there's definitely trade-offs with the different approaches in terms of emissions, environmental impacts, human impacts, costs, schedule, effectiveness. I think what the community is asking for very broadly is explaining how DC Water got to this point. So walk us through your decision-making process and the alternatives that were evaluated and how you landed on this approach, because I think that would help everyone better understand how we got to this point. So again, as part of the follow-up, providing that kind of detail, including any additional detailed environmental, analyses that were done as it relates to, the emissions of all types would be very helpful, again, to help folks better understand, why ultimately you all picked this path as the best approach. So I do want to pause and hand it off to Marjorie first, and then David after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. Well, that's a perfect segue, and everyone has made incredibly smart, astute comments. Just three things that I want to say. Professor Welton was trying to get on tonight. He's going. The Navy asked him to go to Hawaii for their water contamination issues. So, but I'm happy to introduce you to him. He'd be more than happy to talk with you. I mean, because goal is to try to get the safest, healthiest process in place. Secondly, in the NEPA process, the environmental impact statement, the environmental assessment did not address, it did not compare the two CIPP processes, the UV and the thermal. It did not. In the context of environmental and human health impacts, it just did not. And it didn't really even address any environmental impacts, nor mention climate change. The ANC asked for more information about CIPP with very specific request for why you did not use UV. And a lot of the public comments asked for EA revision plus other comments about UV. The third thing and the last thing is that several of the studies you mentioned, and I ran up against this when I first started researching CIPP, several of the studies you mentioned, unfortunately, are not peer-reviewed scientific studies. They were funded by the industry, by NASCO. And there's a concerted effort, maybe but where there are lawsuit threats and others for anybody who's pushing the UV. So there's a concerted public relations effort, and some of the reports are biased. I learned this myself, so I just wanted to pass that on.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Marjorie, very much. I don't need an introduction with Professor Walton. I know him. In fairness, he may not remember who I am, but I have his contact. I know how to get a hold of him, so I appreciate the offer, though. On the environmental assessment, we're a little bit hamstrung by what goes in that. It's dictated to us. The outline and the subjects are dictated to us. We do the research on those topics that we're told to research, whether it's wetlands or endangered species, vegetation, whatever it might be. And we do that. I do concur. The environmental assessment didn't address specifically the chemical discharges from the different CIPP methods, installation methods, and it didn't particularly address climate change either. I do concur with that.
The executive order does not prohibit you to address these things. You go through the various actions you consider and the alternatives and impacts. The executive order 11988 doesn't limit you at all of what you can address for any action that occurs in the floodplain. So I just want to reiterate that, because too many agencies just put that aside and then say, well, the EA, we can only address so many things. Well, under the executive order, you can address all these things. And my quick question about
Lois,
the floodplain.
I know I want to recognize Mr. Bardin, who has had his hand raised for a bit.
We'll
come back to you after.
Okay,
after Mr.
please
Bardin.
come back.
Okay. Yeah.
I still wanted to mention real quick. Marlene made that one other point about there's different groups in the industry. We understand that to eliminate bias from this kind of a conversation is I mean, in large part, to be honest, that's what I see our role as an owner is to read this and read that. And there's always somebody trying to sell a different method, right? And I feel like part of our job is to sort through all that. But Marjorie, I just wanted to acknowledge that and
Thank you.
And Miss Powell, I think you might have. Do you want to add to Mr. Elge's answer as well?
Commissioner, thank you. I don't want to jump in front of Mr. Bardeen and I believe Mr. Gill, so I will wait. But I
wanted to add on to
wanted
that
to just make one last comment. No, sir.
Okay, Mr. Bardeen, David, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Wall. My major point is to ask, we've heard several references to the contract which DC Water has awarded. It's not clear to me whether that contract is now publicly available for people in the neighborhood to read and see what questions, if any, it raises. Do you now have that contract online somewhere where people can read it? If not, is there any problem in making it available either directly from DC Water or indirectly via the ANC?
So I know I've given you this answer a few times in the past, and I don't know that you necessarily appreciate, or well, not that you don't appreciate it, but I don't know that you necessarily like it. A contract like that would have to go through a FOIA.
I may not remember
it. A request for a specific contract would have to be submitted through a FOIA request.
Okay, Commissioner Wall, I think that's, like, I'm 88 years old and I've got FOIA requests all over the country on electric grid issues. I'm not going to give you a FOIA request for I did in the past, but not now. It doesn't make sense to me, and I'm glad that Keisha Powell is on this listening to make this a FOIA issue. I mean, you can make a judgment, I think, within DC Water, whether there's anything sensitive in that contract which should not be disclosed, as if it were a FOIA issue, but then just make it available so that people who are talking about what the contract says and what it means, or maybe they don't understand what it means, will be able to look at the text of the contract. But that's for what it's worth. I throw that out as a suggestion. If I may just take the moment, because Keisha Powell is here, I think it might be worth, and I'm very pleased that she's the chief operating officer for DC Water and has a critical role to play here. I think it might be worth your checking with the DC Department of Health, whether they have any role here. If we're talking about possible toxins and effects on people in the apartment houses nearby, or people walking on Albemarle Street nearby, that might be interesting. You've heard a reference to the situation in Hawaii today. And I want to call your attention to the fact that there, the Hawaii Department of Health has ordered the US Navy to stop certain operations because of toxic situation that's unique there. It has nothing to do with what we're dealing with here. But for all I know, it applies here too. I have some other issues which I'll save, as Commissioner Wall asked me to, till the end of the discussion.
And I do want to say we're getting close to 9 p.m. So we may not get all of these questions answered on this call. We've had a lot that's been answered. We will be pulling together again a follow-up note to DC Water requesting and writing some additional details and responses from our prior list, as well as further clarity on the questions that were raised tonight. So if you didn't get your question answered this evening, definitely please reach out to myself or any of the other commissioners, and we'll make sure that we get that forwarded on to DC Water. I want to go back to Lois, and then to Gil, and then to Ms. Powell.
Okay, I just have a quick question. It may be a long answer, but maybe not. As to the manholes in the floodplain located below the base flood elevation, the 100-year, which can be pretty well measured out, either quick and dirty, or you guys doing a quick and dirty FIS on it. But anyway, how are you protecting those manholes from water infiltration? Will you be sealing the tops? I know you're going to be putting rock around them for the hydrodynamic load, but what are you doing to seal off the inside and the top of the manholes that are below the 100-year flood base flood? Thank you.
I know we're gonna. I kind of think we might have lost Annie by now, but Annie, if you're still on, I'd like you to chime in on that one if you can, or if you're not here, I can give a general answer. I think I don't think we have Annie anymore. Basically, all of the manholes are receiving rehabilitation as well. Something was moving. Is that Annie?
Yeah, sorry, it's me again. Yeah. Yes, I understand the question. So that you're talking in particular about the manholes. Those are the manholes that we are planning to rehabilitate, not the manholes that are exposed that are planned for asset protection. Is that correct?
Or just the ones in the floodplain?
And the ones in the floodplain that would be located.
How are you protecting those manholes from water infiltration? I understand you're putting rock around it for hydrodynamic loads, but what do you how are you protecting them from floodwaters getting inside those manholes? Are you sealing off the top? Are you sealing where there might be cracks, whatever, in the main part of the manhole?
Yeah, so it sounds like you are talking, it can address both. So there are certain manholes that are located adjacent to the creek, and those manholes are exposed, and you can see them when you're walking through the creek or walking through the park. And those manholes we plan to armor, and that's what you're talking about in terms of the hydrodynamic component of it. So those are being armored with large rocks and stones and other things that are meant to protect them from the erosive and sort of hydraulic forces of the creek when it's undergoing high flows. In addition to that, those manholes and all of the manholes in the park have been identified as requiring rehabilitation. The survey information that we have for those manholes varies in terms of the age and the quality of it. And so our contracting partners here will be doing an inspection of those manholes, and they'll be making some initial assessments. Those will be submitted to DC Water, and an evaluation will be made as to what exact level of rehabilitation will be required per manhole. As part of that, there will be some modifications that may be made to the cover, and those will be in alignment with current DC Water specifications. There's some concern you can't exactly seal off a manhole because there's some venting that needs to happen to allow pressure within the pipes to escape. But there will be, for manholes that are within the floodplain that will be in the proposed floodplain, because some modifications are being made to the floodplain as a result of this project, that will be taken into consideration with the selection of the cover.
Just one last comment. I know in other communities, they are sealing off those sewer manholes in the floodplain. So you might want to look into that.
Yeah, there are sealing options. I think that an entire seal, there's probably some modifications that are being made elsewhere within that system. And I can't speak exactly for those because I'm not on this project. I'm not sure what the details are, but some allowance has to be made for venting within those pipes.
I want to now pass off to Gil for your question, please. And then Mr. Barden, your final question. And there's a question raised around, why can't this meeting keep going until midnight? We are losing participants and we want to be respectful and allow everyone to participate in this conversation, and also want to stress that this is not the last conversation. This is kicking off a new phase of conversation with DC Water, as they begin to advance mobilization. And we welcome, all feedback after tonight, and we will absolutely make sure that DC Water is responding to that feedback. So don't consider the 9 o'clock ending to be the end of this conversation. It's the end of this Zoom for this evening, but DC Water will be engaged, very deeply as we move forward. Gil, go ahead.
Hello. Yes. So I think there was a point made about making the contract available, and it sounded like that would answer a lot of the questions about some of the details that people were asking about. But and maybe people are going to make a request for that. I don't know how that's going to be solved, or maybe it can be done in some way. But are there some things that you could just answer that I think actually one of the commissioners mentioned, which is what can change at this time in the contract? If you read it and tell us what are the variables that are still kind of in play, or that you could change around things in there, different components. I mean, however it is that it's structured, if you make that available, will you make that available to us? And then really just to make sure to follow up on someone else made this point of making an outside assessment, if some other organization could look at the contract environmental, make sure that they feel that it follows, because I'm hearing just multiple sides about this, I know executive order, different things, to make sure that there's no conflict, industry reports, all these things that I hear about. Wouldn't it just make everyone more comfortable, including you, that you could basically cite that an outsider said that this is good, and make that assessment? Would you commit to doing that, as was kind of mentioned by a couple of others? I just didn't know if you had answered that question or you just went on to the next thing, so I didn't know what the answer was. Thanks.
So I can't commit tonight to sharing the contract. Victoria in our legal office is a specialist on all this. I'll have a conversation with her in the morning about what we can and can't do, and if we need a specific FOIA request or not. The rest of that's kind of a follow-on depending on that first answer. But we're definitely happy to engage with an independent party.
So if you're not able to share it until getting a request, I don't know how long these things take, but then would you commit to waiting so that the community can, I don't know if some members, whoever asked that question, wants to take that opportunity. I don't know how long those requests take. Would you commit to waiting so that the community is more informed before, because it's hard to make suggestions without knowing what's possible, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can't make any commitments tonight. It won't take long, and I mean, there's about 1 million hypotheticals that can come off of that. If you can just let us kind of take that first step.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gil, for that question. We have one final question from Mr. Barden. Please be as.
Kikisha Powell's ahead of me.
We'll let Ms. Powell wrap up for us after your question.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, and listen to me, please, Will out, the manhole that starts on the south side by the apartment houses is going to be relined, just as that huge 40-foot drop or whatever it is, manhole right near Albemarle Street is going to be relined. So that if there are toxins released in the process of relining, the fact that during the course of the relining, the sewage is diverted, and it's beside the point. The question that's been raised by the article in the Forest Hills Connection this morning is whether there'll be toxins released. And if there are toxins released into the air, they'll be right near the apartment houses. And people going to their cars or walking with anybody would want to know that. And the same thing perhaps on the Albemarle Street side, which is even a much bigger and deeper. So I don't feel that the answer that Will gave on that really is, I think it's beside the point. The question is, will there be toxins released, or may there be? Maybe that's a fair way of putting it. Could there be toxins released to the air in the course of relining these assets? And if so, how do you evaluate them, et cetera?
The Louisiana Tech study, it goes into great detail. They did a full air analysis on the entire chemical makeup of the steam plume that comes out of that. They break that down. We'll make sure to share that. We would expect very similar results to that study on this project.
Well, what you've heard is a suggestion that somebody who is more independent, such as the professor from Purdue, be invited to give his ideas on the subject.
Thank you, Mr. Barton. And we've captured that as well, and we'll follow up with DC Water with regard to having that independent review, of their process and their mobilization. I do want to give Ms. Powell the chance to share any final thoughts on behalf of DC Water. And again, once again, remind everyone that this entire session will be posted on the website if you want to watch it again. And we will be pulling together a detailed follow-up for DC Water to respond to based on the discussion tonight. Ms. Powell, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Wall. And I want to thank everyone who has been in attendance this evening. I certainly appreciate hearing the questions and the discussion. We certainly will follow up in writing, and if you will allow us to, Commissioner Wall would be happy to come back and present again with more detail and making sure that we're responding to the questions. I have taken note of the questions that have been asked. I know that our acting director of the Department of Engineering and Technical Services is online, as well as my senior technical advisor. We'll be reviewing this project with not only our internal team, but also the consultant that has performed some of the work and the assessments, and doing a review of those and making sure that we can answer all of the questions that have been raised, including how we came to utilizing this methodology. I believe that Will touched on that, what our limitations are given where the construction is and what we need to achieve on the project, including the amount of lining that needs to take place. I believe there are some limitations there, and we need to be more detailed in our description of how we arrived at this particular methodology, which then takes us to having to mitigate any environmental impacts and certainly any safety and health concerns that are present or inherent in this process. I think Mr. Bardeen's suggestion of consulting with the Department of Health is a great one, and we will certainly do that. We have a relationship with the District Department of Health as well, where we can work with them and get some input from them. And we will also continue our discussions with the District Department of Environment and consulting any other expertise that is needed that would help us bring additional information to the communities that are impacted by this. So we look forward to receiving your detailed questions. I've also taken note of the communications requests, as has Emmanuel, and we will make sure that we provide that extensive communication going forward, or continue to provide the communication on this project. And I look forward to receiving the written questions and then scheduling a follow-up presentation with you, sir, if that is your desire.
Thank you very much, Ms. Powell, and thank you to all the other members of the DC Water team and your consultants. We definitely appreciate you all joining us this evening for this community meeting. And we realize that things are just launching with your contractor. As you get more details in terms of schedule and everything else, we do welcome you returning to share those details with the community. And we also welcome, again, written responses to the many, many questions that have been posed this evening, and actually coming back to present again with regard to any open questions that might exist, perhaps next month as you get closer to mobilization. So thanks again for your team for visiting us with this evening. And again, to the community, please continue to reach out to any of us as your commissioners, and we will make sure that we submit those questions to DC Water. With that, again, the session's recorded. We'll post it and again, make it available to you. And thanks everyone from the community for coming out to share these very, very real concerns. And we'll make sure that we do get these addressed as we move forward. Thanks, everyone, and have a great evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.